Sincere humility. When we consider who God is and what He has done for us, we should worship and serve Him with the utmost humility. Here's Gene.
This is a Psalm of David. Actually, David wrote a lot of the Psalms, but he actually wrote 4 of the Psalms of Ascents. And this is the third one in the Songs of Ascents that David wrote. And it begins with a statement of humility. This is what he wrote in verse 1. Lord, my heart is not proud. My eyes are not haughty. I do not get involved with things too great or too difficult for me. Now that's an interesting statement coming from David, because as we overlook his whole life, he doesn't stand out as a prideful man. He stands out as a man who made some serious mistakes and serious sins. We know that about his life. But when you read the story of his life, you know, he wasn't going around like King Saul and building monuments to himself. He worshiped God. He knew God. When he was out of fellowship with God and God got his attention, he fell on his face before God and admitted his sins. There was one occasion, by the way, when his oldest brother accused him of being prideful, when he was just a young guy, when he came down to see how the army of Saul was doing against the Philistines, and he saw Goliath come out, and he started asking, who is this guy? And his oldest brother, who was in the army, came over and said, I know why you're here. You're here because of arrogance. You're here because you're proud, and really condemned him, and which I think was a result of the older brother's jealousy, because David, he knew was chosen eventually to succeed Saul, and all the older brothers were rejected, including this older brother. So let me read that opening verse again. Lord, my heart is not proud, my eyes are not haughty. I do not get involved with things too great or too difficult for me. Now the question is, what does he mean when he says I don't get involved with things that are too great or too difficult? Well, I think if you go back, for example, to Psalm 8 that he wrote, that David wrote, and you read these words, when I observe your heavens, the work of your fingers. And he's talking to God. He's looking at the universe, which he could see out there, you know, when he's a shepherd boy on those Bethlehem hills. And you can believe that on a clear night, the stars were just incredible. So when I observe these things, the moon, the stars, which you set in place. And here was a statement of great humility. What is man that you remember him? The Son of Man that you look after him. And there he's talking about humanity, people, himself. And then he says, you made him a little less than God and crowned him with glory and honor. And there he is not saying we are almost like God. He was simply saying that we're made in the image of God. This God of creation, this God who's done all of these things that are so far beyond our comprehension. I can't even imagine it. And I think basically what he is saying here is, in this psalm, is that these things are so difficult for me. I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to explain all this. I'm not going to argue with people. I'm going to fall humbly before my God. And I'm going to worship him in terms of who he really is. It's interesting, I've been reading a book by James Molben, who is a physicist. And the title, basically, of the book is God and Science Coming Full Circle. And he's a believer. He's a very brilliant guy. And one of his target audiences in that book are atheists. And he mentions that he has a lot of friends in the academic world who are atheists that he respects, and they respect him. But then he talks about a new breed of atheists. He calls them the new atheists. And he says, I hear them talk, as I hear them debate, as I hear them share their perspectives, what I see is arrogance. In other words, their whole tone is prideful, know-it-all. And if you don't agree there is no God, you're stupid. He says that's the message he's hearing from these new atheists. Even the old atheists are a bit more respectful in terms of the creation, though they don't believe in the God that created it. But the new atheists, well, I think the psalmist said it pretty clearly. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Anyway, it's a very interesting approach to the subject of humility and relationship, that the more you know, the more you understand or realize you don't know. And I think that, in essence, is what David's talking about. I cannot spend a lot of time on the things I can never really know or understand. And so you get the flow here. Let me just reread again verse 1. Lord, my heart is not proud, my eyes are not haughty. I do not get involved with things too great or too difficult for me. Instead, and you go right on, you see, to the next verse, verse 2. Instead, I have calmed and quieted myself like a little weaned child with its mother. I am like a little child. In other words, he's saying, in view of everything that I don't know, I simply am not concerned about what I don't know. I want to focus on what I do know in relationship to God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so he's talking about being like a child. And it reminds me of the question that was asked of Jesus by the disciples when they said, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Remember Jesus' answer? It really correlates, I think, with what David is testifying to here. Then Jesus called a child to him and had him stand among them. Now, you understand that child, in both the Hebrew and the Greek, that covers a long span of time, from birth even up to adolescence. And even the word child was used of the unborn child in the womb of Mary, the same basic word in the Greek New Testament. So this child that Jesus called was obviously old enough to walk up there beside Jesus. Can't you imagine this? Incredible. There's that child and all these adult guys, by the way, who had some pretty impure motives as to who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. I assure you, he said, unless you are converted and become like children. Now, understand he's not saying unless you are converted and become childish. There's a big difference between being childish and being childlike. He's talking about being childlike. Unless you are converted and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child, this one is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. In essence, what he is saying here is, once you understand who God is and what he's created and the things that are far beyond you, how can you be prideful? David said, I'm like a child. I cannot spend a lot of time on those things that I'll never understand. And he was not advocating ignorance. Neither was Jesus. He wasn't saying don't learn or don't search. What he was saying is what Paul said. That kind of knowledge puffs up. But the more you come to know God in Jesus Christ, the more you will express humility. The more you realize that you don't know. So the question for application is, why is it so easy to be prideful even when we understand God's gift of grace in our lives? Well, number one is we're still in our mortal flesh. we're tempted. Secondly, this is where Satan attacks us. That's where he attacked Jesus, remember? When he told him to turn the stones into bread. He told him to, jump off the pinnacle of the temple. He told him to fall down and worship him. He was appealing to pride in the humanity of Jesus. And of course, in each case, Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan." See, Satan attacks us in the area of pride. And again, the more we understand God, the more it leads to humility. I'm not saying the more theology you know, the more Bible truth you know, the more doctrine you know, but the more you know of God, and all those things should point to God, the greater will be the element, the quality, the characteristic of humility. So here's the principle. When we consider who God is and what he has done for us, we should worship and serve him with the utmost humility.